Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has announced his presidential campaign during a Twitter event with Elon Musk. Technical glitches caused many listeners to drop out, but DeSantis didn't really say anything new anyway, and Twitter is shaping up to be a major media force for the Republican Party, adding more video capability. Former Fox News host Tucker Carlson, who remains one of conservative media's most popular figures, even after being let go by Fox News, is starting a new show on Twitter. Anyone who pays the subscription price on Twitter can now also upload very long videos, making the platform more competitive with YouTube. In contrast to Donald Trump, DeSantis is a classic Republican who made his career during the War on Terror under President Bush, which, according to a new study by Brown University, claimed around 4.5 million lives. DeSantis wants to score points with the culture war against wokeness and with the economy. However, his activities in Florida are so aggressive that they give the woke brigades a significant boost. And let's not forget that back in the day, the American intelligence services recruited people such as Herbert Marcuse to create critical theory, which is the main strategy of the left. It means attacking everything that is normal and majority. It's a controlled culture war. During the Bush administration, incredible amounts of money were squandered on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, after which the housing market collapsed and an economic crisis began. The national debt increased dramatically, and new legislation such as the Patriot Act increased the power of the federal government. So curb your expectations with Mr. DeSantis. It is a two-party cartel anyway. The relationship with Elon Musk could be a significant boost for DeSantis, as it gives him credibility with Musk's massive following, including his 140 million Twitter followers. Musk is supposedly an admirer of DeSantis. Last year, Musk said he would support the governor if he ran for president. Mr. Musk seems genuine and concerned. However, he is not an expert on the American ruling class, and he's not an expert on the superpowers in general. He's just too busy. And he's also a maker of electric cars, and he's a strong believer in climate change, according to climate science, which was built by the military, which nobody really knows about, created for military purposes, and of course, the true capabilities are secret. So many people in the conservative sphere, they forgive Musk for being a believer in climate change and for making electric cars. Now, he's also shooting spy satellites into space for the United States government, and he seems to be sort of a fan of the CIA and all the security agencies. It's not entirely clear how much he understands about all that. Musk is also friends with Joe Rogan, the super successful podcaster, who said about himself he is basically a leftist on most topics, but he just looks like a Republican. Again, many people forgive Joe Rogan because they expect him to advertise for the Republican Party. Now, I myself had gotten to know retired two-star General Albert Stubblebine, and he didn't understand the ruling class when he was on active duty. He told me that himself. He just didn't have the time. He didn't have the focus. So this was a guy who started his career as a tank commander, then got pulled into military intelligence, and at some point he was in the race to become the next head of the NSA. Now imagine a head of the NSA not really understanding the American system, the American ruling class, what's really going on. So this is kind of the world we live in. Donald Trump was banned from Twitter following in his supporters' activity in the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. He has yet to return to the page even after Musk let him back on. So, who is Ron DeSantis? Who is he really? Now, he graduated from Yale University and he joined the Delta Kappa Epsilon fraternity. Members have included 5 of 45 presidents of the United States. For example, you had George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. Now, these two, of course, had been members of the Skull and Bones fraternity as well, which means much older intelligence networks. Far older and far more powerful than the CIA or its predecessor, the OSS. Now, historians to this day will tell you that the United States of America, that they didn't have any proper foreign intelligence service up until World War II, and then they hastily overnight improvised intelligence agencies, and then have been continuing to learn the game. But in reality, there's much older networks that go back to the British colonial empire, aristocratic structures. So his Ron DeSantis's ancestors were partially poor migrants from Italy. Now, this is something the Democrats try to attack him with. So he's against migration, or he's against illegal migration. So they attack him for that, and they will point to his grandmother, for example, being a poor, illiterate migrant. About 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, she entered the United States, and she was not turned back, even though there was a high probability that she would have to go back to Italy. Now, as far as we can tell, at this point, there are no powerful people among Ron DeSantis' ancestors. Now, maybe we'll find some, some Italian aristocrats or some sort of thing that could actually be the case, because you have to imagine, why did this guy get to go to Yale and Harvard and join these old fraternities? They're very, very selective, and then he got a career in the military, in politics, and now he maybe become president. So this is something we have to explore further. Now, when he was in his second year at Harvard, he connected to the Pentagon, and he served for years on active duty in the Navy as a JAG, a Judge Advocate General. So officially his job was to make sure that prisoners of war and so on, that they are treated fairly, humanely according to law. And he was also supposed to help soldiers and special forces to stay legal, because law is quite complicated, so you need experts about that. He was stationed with Joint Task Force Guantanamo, worked directly with inmates at Guantanamo Bay Detention Center. Records of DeSantis' service in the U.S. Armed Forces were often heavily censored upon release. Now, there have been former prisoners accusing DeSantis of observing torture and facilitating torture and essentially cooking the books to make everything look perfectly legal. So these prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, they were treated horrifically. So there was all these torture methods that we've seen all over the world. So this is kind of standard stuff that many countries do and have done. And there were some special forms of mental torture thrown into the mix to make these prisoners break, but that meant that these Muslim prisoners, they wanted to die. They just wanted to leave this earth and go to heaven, and was supposed to be that. But the system wasn't letting them die, so they force-fed these people, torturing them some more. Allegedly, Ron DeSantis was watching, DeSantis was smiling, and he was cooking the books, but the files are secret. So, at first, the official line was that the Geneva Convention doesn't apply to these prisoners because they were not regular soldiers wearing army fatigues and official symbols and that sort of thing. But in 2004, starting in 2004, the Supreme Court disagreed. They actually deserved some kind of protection. And most of the people in Guantanamo had no reason to be there. So out of 600 prisoners at some point, maybe 24 were actually connected to Al-Qaeda, were actually important. Many prisoners had just been snatched off the street, sold by warlords in Pakistan or Afghanistan. Snatched off the street, sold to the Americans as supposed Al-Qaeda. Now, this has been established over and over again. DeSantis seems to have been considered particularly reliable even before Guantanamo, and after Guantanamo, his career took off even more. In January 2010, Scott Horton published an article in Harper's Magazine describing the super-secret Camp No, a black site about 1 mile outside the main camp perimeter, which included an interrogation center. His description was based on accounts by 4 guards who had served in Guantanamo. Certain prisoners were taken there one by one, tortured, whatever, and some of them died, and then it was claimed they had committed suicide, which is not really credible. And so DeSantis may have been involved in that, cooking the books. So that's the situation. And if this guy, Scott Horton, if he could find 4 guards that told him things, who else has data on this? You know, maybe the Russians, maybe the Chinese, maybe somebody, or maybe some Democrats or whoever. Somebody may have gotten some of the files, some of the evidence, some witnesses, and that could become a huge problem. Now, in the text, Whose God Rules, David McColgan, defense attorney for Guantanamo detainees, recounts these crazy stories, how they tried to turn these prisoners insane, and then they wanted to die, and then they weren't allowed to die. DeSantis served in the Navy, and he was advising SEAL Team 1. He was deployed to Iraq as a SEAL Team advisor, legal counsel for a SEAL commander during the 2007 surge of U.S. troops. During his deployment, according to the Tampa Bay Times, DeSantis advised Captain Dane Thorleifson, SEAL commander for Special Operations Task Force West in Fallujah, Iraq, advised him on the legality of Special Operations mission in the region. Now, of course, officially, this means DeSantis was making sure that everything was totally legal. But, SEAL teams were supposed to snatch and grab certain specific people. They've got these target packages. You have to grab these people, interrogate them as quickly as possible, because if you hold them longer than 24 hours or 48 hours, they become essentially worthless, because their insurgent friends, they will notice that these guys are missing. They will change their plans. So time was of the essence. Probably quite a bit of torture happened, and DeSantis may have been cooking the books on that too. According to Thorleifson, the Green Berets and SEALs rounded up roughly 100 Iraqi men during DeSantis' deployment. U.S. troops captured the men to gain intelligence and to remove insurgents from the fight. Now, of course, Afghanistan, the whole Afghanistan thing had resulted in chaos, and now the Taliban rule Afghanistan again. Iraq has turned to chaos. We saw the emergence of the Islamic State, so none of this really worked. According to a new study by Brown University, 4.5 million people died either directly or indirectly because of these wars. You have to remember that, so you can't just accept that explanation that's usually given with these topics. The explanation that, look, we were fighting these horrendous people, these horrendous insurgents, so we had to prevent them from taking power because they're psycho-lunatics, and so they had to be fought, and you have to crush a few eggs and all that. If you look at the bigger picture, none of this made sense to begin with. And when these people become compromised, potentially compromised, such as DeSantis, this opens up a whole new can of worms. And you have to remember, quite a few of these special forces guys, they get destroyed by their jobs, by these deployments. They have to kill and torture, and that never really leaves them. And these super soldiers, they get all kinds of brain damage over the course of time, and that's a very, very big health issue. So you can probably imagine these Special Forces SEAL guys back then serving with DeSantis as an advisor. These SEAL guys, they're now probably pretty broken. Some of them are suicidal. Turned to alcohol and drugs and all that sort of stuff. And so these SEAL people, they have a lot of issues now. And it looks like Ron DeSantis is sleeping like a baby. The files were often redacted because Release of such information would be a clearly unwarranted invasion of the personal privacy of Ronald DeSantis and other identified individuals, according to a letter from the Navy. He would have had very, very intimate knowledge of the conditions at the prison camp. Retired Colonel Michael Baumgartner, commander of the Joint Detention Group at Guantanamo during DeSantis' service there, told McClatchy at the Miami Herald. He would have had face-to-face contact with them. He would have known them intimately, their backgrounds and all. Now, you have to be careful when former prisoners tell stories nowadays, because there may be somebody who tells something that's not true. And when a lie gets exposed, then, of course, Republicans will say, see, it's all been lies, everything's a lie, so don't believe anything you hear, and so on and so forth. Mark Denbo, professor of Seton Hall Law School, who led the forensic analysis of the 3 deaths of inmates, said it was hard to imagine that anyone with DeSantis' legal training would fail to spot the inconsistencies in the official version. Any JAG would want to know how guys would die while they're in a cell guarded by 5 guys, and how they could have been hanging long enough for rigor mortis and with a rag shoved down their throats. According to Joseph Hickman, who was sergeant of the guard that night, no one was taken from Alpha Block to the medical clinic. It would be interesting to know what happened to all these guards and these former officers who were serving at that place at that time. Are they willing to talk? Have they talked to somebody? Did some of these guards mysteriously die or disappear? They suddenly became rich. This is also something that needs to be looked at further. And of course, he was a professional lawyer, so he knew how to protect himself and protect others, and others know how to protect him. If you shred enough files and you save enough of the information and put that in a vault, of course, you could potentially control Ron DeSantis for the rest of his career and the rest of his life. If he becomes president, he won't make the decisions. He won't actually set the policy, because he's working for an upper class that essentially controls both parties. Now, back in the Bush era, more people were aware of that 2-party cartel. And the actions of the Bush administration were so crazy, and the internet became so powerful at the time that people became less ideological. People actually came together and tried to change things, and you saw the emergence of independent media, and that became a problem for the ruling class. So they had the choice of banning things, going after people, but that was not a good idea. That would have backfired really, really hard. So instead, another way of action was chosen, which was taking over alternative media. Now, during the Obama administration, then of course during the Trump administration, you saw Republicans talking like classic conspiracy buffs. You saw conspiracy stuff being pushed on Fox News and that sort of thing. Now, these rich circles, they were setting the tone, they were setting the agenda, they were fixing the talking points, and more conspiracy media types, they aligned themselves with the Republican Party and say they would harken back to the old days of the John Birch Society, which had been preaching to wait for a political savior and to wait for a secret conservative team of powerful people to arrest the leftists and to save America and that sort of thing. So that's what we've been seeing. A DeSantis administration would be more of the same old that we've seen so many times. No real progress for conservative citizens. And if we see another administration of Joe Biden, it will be more of the same old. Now, we've explained this before. Joe Biden's career and the careers of his whole family, these careers have been managed by the mighty DuPont clan. And the DuPonts, especially in the past, they had been running the right-wing sphere. They had been running large organizations in the right wing because they have enough money. and they rule Delaware like a medieval European fiefdom, essentially. It's long overdue to break up the cartel, and it would be really helpful if Elon Musk actually did something to that regard, and if Joe Rogan did something to that regard. They are interested in figuring things out. They're not such classic ideological people, so there is hope that they may actually understand more over time. But at this point, it's still very much Republicans versus Democrats. Please subscribe to this channel and check out candorintel.com.